as long as Russia continues to pursue this war. And there's a risk of escalation in the war. There's either intentional or by accident, the energy crises of the 1970s. We'll see in the next few weeks where this goes, but this could be more serious than the 1970s.
러시아가 일으킨 전쟁의 본질은 세계 에너지 패권 싸움입니다. 앞으로 50년간 미래 먹거리를 차지하기 위함이죠. 이 전쟁 막후에서 벌어지는 미국과 러시아, 그리고 중국과 유럽까지 치열한 머리 싸움을 담은 책이 있습니다. 세계에서 가장 영향력 있는 에너지 전문가이자 퓰리처상 수상자인 데니얼 예긴 S&P 글로벌 부회장의 가장 최근 저서인데요. 놀랍게도 이 책은 2020년에 이미 우크라이나 침공을 예견했습니다. 오늘 저희는 예긴 부회장을 직접 만나 이 전쟁의 끝은 어디인지, 그리고 글로벌 경제, 특히 우리 한국 투자자들에게 의미하는 바는 어떤 것이 있을지 들어보겠습니다. This morning, sir, we are delighted to have Energy Guru with us, Dr. Daniel Yegin. He is the Vice Chairman of S&P Global and also a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. Hello, Dr. Yegin. Thanks for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
바이든 미 대통령이 역대 최대 규모의 전략 비축률 방출을 결정했습니다. 이를 두고 골드만삭스에서는 단기적으로 당장은 도움이 될지는 모르겠지만 구조적인 문제는 해결하지 못할 것이다. 이렇게 밝혔는데요. 이에 대해서 어떻게 생각하시나요?
I think the release of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve at the scale of 1 million barrels a day for 180 days is an important contribution to the world oil market. We're looking at about 4 million barrels a day of Russian oil that goes to Europe. And so if you replace 1/4 of that with Strategic Petroleum Reserve, that helps solve what could be a big problem. I think at this point, people don't expect this war to go on for 180 days or longer than that. But Europe has made the determination that it wants to move away from importing Russian oil and gas. And that's something that's going to unfold over this year and into next year.
에너지 가격이 원래 기복이 심하지만 올해 초처럼 오르내림이 심했던 적은 없는 것 같습니다. 전망도 $80에서 $180까지 좀 극과 극인데요. 부회장님께서 보시는 올해 유가 전망은 어떻습니까?
Well, I think that you can see pressures that would push oil prices up and push them down. If, for instance, COVID becomes a really big problem in China and Chinese oil demand goes down significantly, that would take some of the pressure off the oil price. If Iranian oil comes back into the market because there's a nuclear deal, that would help the market. But I think, my own view is that there is a lot of risks there that exist and will continue to exist as long as Russia continues to pursue this war. And there's a risk of escalation in the war. There's either intentional or by accident. And so, I think, you can only think in terms of scenarios right now in prices, but there's certainly a risk of prices going higher.
그렇다면 주식시장 그리고 개인 투자자 측면에서 의미하는 바가 뭘지 궁금합니다. 실제 지난해 S&P 500 종목 중에 가장 두드러지는 성적을 나타냈던 것은 에너지 업종이었습니다. 그리고 최근 워런 버핏도 옥시덴탈 투자에 나서서 주목을 끌었는데요. 투자 관점에서 조언 부탁드립니다.
Well, generally, I don't talk about specific stocks or equities, but certainly oil was out of fashion in the equity markets. Investors were not interested in it. There have been 2 price collapse. Prices, profitability had gone down. But you see now that investors are interested again in oil and gas. They're also interested in other commodities because there's a sense that we are going to be in a period of higher commodity prices, partly because of the disruption coming out of Russia and Ukraine. Russia and Ukraine together export 30% of the world's wheat, and that's been disrupted. and so wheat prices are going up. So I think investors are generally looking at natural resources and commodities very differently than they were during COVID time when the world kind of shut down.
저서 뉴맵을 보면 러시아 우크라이나 사태를 상당히 날카롭게 예견하셨습니다. 우크라이나 침공은 결국 에너지 패권이 핵심이었는데 러시아가 이 전쟁으로 갖게 될 이득이 클까요?
In the new map, I do talk about Putin discussing whether Russia's an energy superpower, and it was. And he liked what it did for him in terms of revenues and what it did in terms of political power. I think that Russia is going to continue to be a significant supplier of oil and gas, but it's really alienated its European buyers, who were its most important buyers, who were who look to Russia as a reliable supplier. They don't think of Russia as a reliable supplier. So Russia, I think, will not have the same influence. It'll still be big, and other countries, India and China, will buy Russian energy. But Europe, I think, has really made the determination that it wants to back away from Russian oil and gas. And that just kind of undermines the notion of Russia as an energy superpower, because it won't have the influence, at least in Europe, that it's had in the past because of energy. Putin made several major miscalculations. He thought his army would perform better than it did. He didn't think that the Ukrainians would resist. He thought they would welcome Russian soldiers. He thought Europe would say, "Oh my gosh, we depend on Russian energy. We're just going to stand aside." He thought the U.S. was divided, wouldn't have the willpower, and he thought that rising energy prices, which could still happen, would undermine this kind of coalition that we're now seeing. So all of those factors are at hand. He seems to be very isolated, with only a few people around him who can really talk to him. Nobody really wants to tell him that he's wrong. And I think the question now, will he, in a sense, de-escalate and focus on eastern Ukraine and consolidate that as almost a Russian province, new Russia, Novaya Russia, or will he escalate? Will he use? There is concern in some quarters that he might use tactical nuclear weapons. So I think week to week, we don't know where this is, but and I think he wants some kind of victory by May 9th, because that is Victory Day from World War II in Russia. So he's going to want to have something to show for this. But I think he had no idea how poorly his military would do, at least so far.
사실 바이든 대통령은 취임 당시부터 그린 트랜지션을 강조해 왔습니다. 하지만 이번 사태를 지나면서 미국이 세계 최대 LNG 수출국으로 거듭나면서 어떻게 보면 바이든 정부의 이 전통 에너지에 대한 정책도 변화할 것이라는 전망이 나오겠는데요. 부회장님께서는 어떻게 보시나요?
I think starting around November, when they saw gasoline prices go up, and gasoline prices matter a great deal when you're moving into an election year, and this is an election year in the United States.
Right.
And then this crisis happened. We had the Secretary of Energy at our big CERA Week conference in Houston at the beginning of March, where she actually said to the energy industry, "Please increase production." This is not something that they were saying. This is not something that they were saying to the industry 5 months ago. So I think they now see that they still have their green ambitions, but they have to deal with the realities of the energy supply today, where 80% of world energy, roughly 80% of U.S. energy, comes from hydrocarbons.
사우디아라비아와 UAE 같은 오펙은 어떻게 움직일 거라 보시나요?
I think OPEC is in a difficult situation right now because a number of governments are saying, please increase production. And that really is a message to just two countries, Saudi Arabia and UAE, which have what's called spare capacity, have extra production capacity, and saying to them, please produce more oil. So far, they've said, no, we want to stick to our OPEC plus deal with Russia. But I think the pressure is going to mount, particularly if the markets become more difficult. Certainly today, the United States does not have the relationship it's had with Saudi Arabia in the past. And Saudi Arabia is now going to price some of its oil in Chinese currency. And they do talk about a strategic relationship with Russia. So I think it's I think they're in, as one senior Saudi said to me, they're in a hard place right now to know how to manage this situation.
글로벌 에너지 그리고 경제 패권의 또 다른 한 축인 중국은 어떤 대응에 나설 것이라 보시나요?
Well, there's the political impact, and then there's the economic and energy impact. The political impact is, of course, at the beginning of the Olympics in February, Putin and President Xi signed an agreement talking about unlimited cooperation between our two countries. Well, that was before the invasion. And, you know, we'll never know, but you wonder, did Putin actually tell Xi what he was going to do? Or did he just sort of imply that he was going to take the eastern part of Ukraine? So China, on the one hand, is trying to maintain a certain neutrality. It's worried about sanctions. I think that given what's happening in the Chinese economy now, China's not as confident as it was 6 or 8 months ago. But they do have a strategic relationship with Russia, and Xi and Putin appear to have a very close personal relationship. I've been in meetings, you know, in conferences where they describe each other as best friends. And I think that for China, it's balancing. It doesn't want to aggravate its relationships with the United States or with Europe, although they recently advised the Europeans to separate themselves from the United States. But on the other hand, I think that as a result of this, the sanctions, the withdrawal of companies' investment from Russia, that Russia will just simply become more dependent on the Chinese economy.
그렇다면 이런 변화들이 한국에게 시사하는 것은 어떤 것들이 있을까요?
So Korea is so integrated into the world economy that whatever happens will affect Korea. One area of interest is that we've seen in Europe, countries who seem to be moving away from nuclear power are now turning back to nuclear power. France has said that they're going to build 6 new nuclear power plants and perhaps another 8. And so I think it will be, with the new president in Korea, it will be important to see what the policy is on nuclear energy as a way to have greater energy independence.
이번 사태가 신재생 에너지로의 전환을 앞당기거나 또는 늦출 것이라 보시나요?
Well, that's of course something I looked at very closely in the new map and the whole question of energy transition. I don't think an energy transition is going to happen overnight. It's going to take, all the other energy transitions have unfolded over a century. So to try and do it half of it in 8 years and the other in 28 years is pretty darn difficult, particularly when you don't have all the technologies. With that said, I think the answer to your question is both. What do I mean by both? Clearly, if you look at, Europe is going to say we've got to step up renewable energy for generating electricity, so we use less gas to generate electricity. On the other hand, I think countries have wakened up to the fact that conventional energy is very important, and these changes don't happen overnight. And there's probably been underinvestment in oil and gas, which is why energy markets were already tight. In last October, well before this crisis began, we saw prices going up, and as you know, in Asia, LNG prices went way up, and they went way up in Europe. So I think you get both greater effort to speed up renewables and energy transition, but also greater reality and recognition that you really have to worry about your energy supplies today. And that's what we're seeing unfolding in the United States. And we see in Germany where, yes, more wind, but they're also saying they're going to build 3 receiving terminals for LNG rather than depend upon pipelines from Russia.
미래 에너지 시장에 가장 강자가 되는 건 누가 될 것이라 보십니까?
I think it will be a mix. Wind will grow, solar will grow, but I think there's a lot of focus now on hydrogen. And I know in Korea, companies have gotten together to try and ensure that Korea has an important role to play in the hydrogen economy. One other thing to think about is as you move towards renewables, people think sun is free, the wind is free, but you need a lot of materials. You need a lot of mining. And I think, China has a very strong position in those resources. And so I suspect that there may be a new geopolitics of energy around renewable energy in terms of the amount of mining and processing that's necessary in order to make a wind turbine, to make an electric car battery. So, I think we'll go from one kind of politics of energy to another kind of politics of energy. And I think people are underestimating how much material will be necessary for renewables. We're doing a study right now of copper. And the ambitions for renewables assume that there'll be a huge amount of copper. But we're saying, where's that copper going to come from? Where are the mines? It takes 16 or 20 years to open a new mine. So I think that, it's not like a straight highway, that there are a lot of bumps along the renewable road as well.
신재생 에너지가 늘어난다고 해도 세계의 석유 소비량은 결국 늘어날 수밖에 없지 않습니까?
But I think that in 2050 the world will still be using a significant amount of oil and natural gas. It will need carbon capture and other technologies, but the overall energy mix will grow. So renewables, I think, will be a much bigger part. So in other words, in 2050 it will still be an energy mix, and I think people don't realize how significant oil and gas are, not just in for putting into your car or power an airplane. If they think of a 787 jet, a Boeing jet, the body's an oil product. You think of the lipid with your Moderna or your Pfizer vaccine. It's an oil product that's mixed in that gets it into your cells. So I think that there are many more uses than people think. So I think we will still have an energy mix. There'll be a different balance in the energy mix. And I think natural gas actually will become more important. Even as we see, there'll be a lot more electric cars. So, today we have a $90 trillion world economy. Maybe in 2050, it'll be $170 trillion. And so you'll need a lot of energy of all kinds to support that.
3차 오일쇼크의 위험은 아직도 있다고 보시나요?
Well, I think that there'll be increased emphasis on energy security again. The world kind of forgot about energy security.
Right.
It's very important to a country like Korea, which is so dependent, and probably Korea has paid more attention to energy security than other countries. I know in the United States, it was like sort of people just forgot about energy security as we became energy independent. Mm-hmm. But we're still part of the world economy. Obviously, people look back, either they lived through it or they've read about it, the energy crises of the 1970s. We'll see in the next few weeks where this goes, but this could be more serious than the 1970s because this involves not only oil, it involves natural gas and LNG, it involves coal, and it involves the world's two nuclear superpowers. Mm. So this is, managing this. And I think right now we've seen a kind of a breakdown in communication between the United States and Russia. And then you have all the other issues around the relationship with the United States with China, the regional questions in Asia that Korea knows so well, South China Sea, all of those things. But I think if there is not some resolution, this could end up being a crisis that will be like no other. So I think it takes very wise management and very thoughtful management to ensure that we get to a good outcome and don't end up with either a greater conflict or a recession or a bigger disruption. And I think those are the risks that are out there right now.
마지막으로 한국 경제에 대한 조언, 특히 저희 시청자들, 한국 개인 투자자들을 위한 조언 부탁드립니다.
Yeah, well, I think that Korea has such great engineering capabilities and ability to move relatively fast and make things happen. I mean, it's really quite extraordinary. I know you all have grown up with it, but what's the growth of the Korean economy from where, let's say, Korea was in the 1970s. And so Korea is a major industrial power. So I think that, building on its engineering strengths and among other things, making sure that it has an important engineering position in hydrogen would be one of the key things that Korea can focus on for the future. The other thing, of course, Korea is a leader in batteries, and there's a strong desire to reduce dependence on batteries from China. And so Korea's capabilities in batteries are very significant. And of course, Korean companies are building joint venture battery facilities in the United States. So I think Korea doesn't have oil and gas, but it has talent and engineering capability. And those are the things that have carried Korea to the position it's in today and that will carry Korea into the future. I guess for investors, it's to say, well, what are the technologies that are going to be really important in the future? And what are the companies that have the really strong capabilities to do that? And to take a 5-year time horizon would be one way to approach it, not as a sort of going in and out, but think about the forces that are shaping the energy future and shaping the global economy and how to play that.
Okay, I think we covered a lot today. Thanks once again for sharing your insights with us.
It's a pleasure to talk with you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity. The world will keep changing, and I'll be very happy to come back and continue the dialogue. So all the best for now.
에너지는 식량과 함께 생존을 좌우하는 자원이죠. 최근 우크라 사태를 비롯해 패권 국가들의 자원 확보 각축전으로 세계 에너지 안보 지형도 요동치고 있습니다. 에너지를 통해 촘촘히 연결된 글로벌 경제도 폭풍 초입에 서 있는데 오늘 인터뷰가 투자자들에게 길잡이 같은 등불이 되었으면 합니다. 함께해 주신 여러분 고맙습니다.